Hi, everybody, and welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 4. My name is Mike Bloom. Much like Dina, we are sleepless in Seattle this week on The Last of Us, as we got a lot of stuff to get into: change of location, introduction of a major character, a beautiful rendition of Take On Me, and maybe a couple plot points that have us all saying, aha, as to what's to come with The Last of Us. But of course, I am not alone here. We are standing hand in hand, saying together. And here's someone who always is cooking on the podcast, not just with some copper cookware. It is the great Grace Leeder.
I burned my hand, Mike. Ow, it's hot. It's a hot pan. Apparently, the steel is supposed to be, it's not supposed to heat up, but yeah, it's nice piece of cookery. Jeffrey Wright's got. I'm actually excited to see Jeffrey Wright on HBO
Yeah,
again.
I would have loved Jeffrey Wright. Maybe he'll have a future career doing like voiceovers for Williams and Sonoma commercials because he just
That'd be great.
described it oh so beautifully.
Yeah. Wow. Just let this guy monologue every episode for however long he wants.
I
Actually.
mean, listen, if you all haven't been on the train to like let Jeffrey Wright be the
Mm,
omniscient narrator behind everything, like if you haven't watched What If, get on board. The train is still slowly rolling along as this season moves at a pretty fast clip here, Grace, despite the fact that, yes, we spend the entire episode kind of hunkered down in one place. Feels like a lot happened. Yes, we are leaving Jackson behind. I still think temporarily. I still think we're going to check back in with them. Of course, we are going to be focusing primarily on this new location and on one new character in particular, as we've been introduced to at least some of the wolves in the past. And I think we finally have found their leader in the form of Isaac, played by Jeffrey Wright. So before we get into specifics behind this episode, Isaac and all, what did you think about this episode in particular?
Yeah, I thought this episode was really good. I mean, I feel like a lot happens, I think, in terms of like stuff that we're going to talk about. Obviously, most importantly, from a character lens of what happens between Dina and Ellie, and them both sharing something about themselves. We do get insight. We get some backstory stuff, some flashback. At least just one scene, and then some info into Isaac, and then there's a lot of running away from infected this episode. So overall, I thought this was really strong. I have minor nits to pick in the way that they like sort of unveiled some of the information that I
Hmm.
think it's funny. The way I was thinking about it was like, this is going to sound silly, I think, but I keep being like, oh, it felt very TV, which, this is a television show. So
No, well,
perhaps
infamously, Grace, HBO is not TV.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Bolstering my point that I think it felt a little too TV at times, but for the most part, I thought it was lovely. And we get the lovely guitar scene that's so cute and lovely, and I love it. So, yeah, for the most part, I'm very happy with this episode and excited to chat about it with you, Mike.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff to derive from themes, from characters, from the situation that we find ourselves in. Seems like, Dina and Ellie and us by proxy are walking into the middle of like a whole ass civil war that's happening. You thought that you made your way out of Boston in the beginning of season 1 with the Fireflies versus Fedra, and now you just walk right back into another situation with the Seraphites versus the WLF. I will say, Grace, we are over halfway through season 3,
Yep.
season at this point. There's only 3 episodes left after this. And I've seen this comment bandied about a couple of times. And this is maybe more of a thing for you and Taran to get into with the book club as to the writing of this season in particular. I mean, maybe to your point, I don't know. It feels a little more TV writing, which again is very odd to say considering it's a TV show. But for some reason, I feel like the first season had these like incredibly beautiful poetic passages or like lines of only 3 to 4 words that felt like icebergs, right? That derive so much meaning underneath. And not to say that season 2 is without those. I feel like it might be skewed more in favor of, more at its face writing. I'm thinking, for instance, that when Dina talks about Ellie getting bit, and she basically just lays out like, well, I was thinking about my future with you that I could possibly never have, and I want to get married and I want to have kids. Like, it's a little on the nose for a show that has been incredibly subtle in the beginning. And not to say that it went from one extreme to the other. I just have sort of finally settled upon this point I think, through 4 episodes. Without getting into too much, I'm curious from your perspective, do you get that sense? And is that more so like a reflection of bringing over the video game dialogue?
Yeah, this is interesting in the sense that we've watched a lot of adaptation stuff that's been adapted, and I feel like there are times I actually think like there's a world where the best thing this show has done over 2 seasons to some people is an entirely fleshed out side plot in terms of episode 3 from last season. And so it's not to say that this show can't figure out how to sort of adapt things that aren't in the story, but there's almost a way in which like they had so much freedom to play around. And this is all interesting considering that like Druckmann is such a part of the process
Hmm.
of this show, which sometimes is not the case for other adaptations. I mean, the sort of most notorious example of basically like fine when you have the source material and bad when it goes off script is Game of Thrones, basically, whereas sort of seems like most of the consensus is as soon as they were trying to do stuff that had not been written for them, it was significantly poor. Um, this is interesting in the sense that I feel like when they, the stuff that they're sort of figuring out that I think for some people is not landing as well is the stuff that's close to what was in the game, but not exactly what was in the game. I think sort of the best example of that, I found this week to be a little more in that camp for me of like it wasn't quite working in the way I think that they wanted to, as opposed to last week that I thought like Taran did a really good job of sort of explaining why last week was not a filler episode, why it was not boring. And I think the speech that Ellie gives last week to sort of like convince the council to vote to send all the people to Seattle is one of the examples I think people are butting up a little bit against, and it feels like incredibly sort of on the nose. I found last week actually to not really fit that upon further reflection, but this week I felt like there was a little bit of like almost like too exposition-y, I guess, in terms of like I have to tell you this information and I need it to sound like I'm in love with you, instead of the way in season 1 where like to me one of the most prescient, I keep coming back to this line
I
because it's
know
the
you
one I
love
stick with,
talking about this moment.
but the like it's not time that did it. Like he says so
Yeah.
much without saying it explicitly, where I feel like this episode maybe is like so much like I'm pregnant. I'm not affected. I love you. It's like a little maybe too much.
I'm
But on the same hands, these are like younger people than
I
Joel.
was about to say these are
Yeah.
different. These are not Joel. Joel, who
Yeah.
closed his heart off for the better part of 2 decades due to like quite literally scarring loss. These are 2 young people that are in love for the first time and don't exactly know how to express themselves. So they do. Maybe the word vomit would be a bit more appropriate. But let us expunge our own word vomit here, Grace, and give our thoughts on the episode, and not to leave those two in the corner too much. So I'm sure they're happy to have a little bit of privacy. But I do want to focus on what starts this episode and what seems to be the big shiny new thing for The Last of Us with the change to Seattle, which is the introduction of Isaac, which is Jeffrey Wright's character and the leader of the Washington Liberation Front. And to your earlier point, we get as we talked about last week, one of these rarities in The Last of Us, which is a flashback scene. Not only that, sort of like you would say, one of the earliest scenes in The Last of Us, except for 2003, and except for, remember when Big Head from Silicon Valley was on that
Mm,
talk show in like the
that's right.
1980s?
We
But
wondered in season 1 whether we were going to get like that was going to happen every episode actually, because
yeah,
we started basically the first 2 episodes of season 1 with flashbacks. So,
yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
But we get one here, 2018, in the Seattle quarantine zone. And we start to see essentially when federal rule was overthrown in favor of the Washington Liberation Front. We see in particular Isaac's turn. But Grace, I was more so doing a head turn when, for my money, and I could be fact checked here, the first like major surprise cameo of The Last of Us has happened. Even when we had like Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker show up, I think it had been
Yeah.
announced that they would be showing
Mhm.
up in some sort of cameo appearances. And this is completely apples and oranges. But I could not help, Grace, but spend the first 30 seconds to minute of this episode looking at all these bros decked out in their Fedra gear, being like, is that Josh Peck on The Last of Us?
Yeah, he plays a very fun character in terms of just being a total douche kind of. But yeah, it's very fun to see Josh Peck on the show. I think you're probably right. I don't know that we've had sort of probably he's like I imagine that for some people, just very candidly, I think some people are gonna be like, I don't even know who that guy is.
Yeah.
It's very fair enough, but I
Listen,
think
for us millennials, though, and this is
that's
the
right.
thing, is that especially when the world stopped in 2003, like it's a really just
It's
freezing
true.
time in millennial culture. So I think Josh Peck showing up is real. It's almost like in the last, not the Last of Us, in the Leftovers, when they had the whole Perfect Strangers, tie
Yeah.
in everything there. It really is playing to the wheelhouse and the generation that had the world essentially end when they were in the throes of their youth.
To be fair, Josh Peck, he was also in Oppenheimer, one
I
of
was
the
gonna
Oscar-winning
say.
movie. Except like the problem is that like there was also like 23 other generic white guys in Oppenheimer, so a little tough to find. But yeah, very fun to see Josh Peck here. I really like this flashback scene. My only quibble is when we eventually cut forward, it says 11 years later, and I'm like, wow, they've been in Seattle for a very long time.
Yeah.
I don't know what. I guess I don't want to be confusing about like what year it like whatever they. That's what they put on the screen. But I like this scene in terms of getting this like these like boys who are joking around, only to like cut to like very serious Jeffrey Wright being like, actually this is the history of what has been happening here.
Yeah, I mean, we get a nickname for these disenfranchised citizens. They're known as voters. It's the pure ironic nickname, Grace, I suppose, like calling a big guy tiny. Just again, it's been a while since we've dealt primarily with Fedra, so I think we forget that, like, at the point that The Last of Us season 1 essentially started in Boston, like, they were outright fascists, right? That they were put in charge of trying to regulate the cordyceps outbreak, and instead they created these, like, militarized quarantine zones that they basically have been ruling over with an iron fist for the better part of a couple of decades. And I feel like, unlike Kansas City, where we only heard about this, we actually do see an out and out revolution happen here. And the call is coming from inside the house, as Isaac is going to stop. He's going to meet with, I don't know if they're officially the WLF at that point, but he's going to stop and talk with their leader, Hanrahan, which is one of the odder names I've heard on this show. And he is just going to quite literally burn all of his bridges by blowing up the douche brigade inside of their own armored car.
Generally shocking moment when he chucks a grenade into the armored car. I was like, oh, that's brutal. That is and then turns to the other youngin and tells him it's time to make a decision. This is fun. There the woman he meets, I believe, if I'm correct, is the mom from Euphoria.
Oh.
She so there's some wondering about whether or not she could have more than just like this thing, which I think Taran and I can talk about a little bit more in terms
Mm-hmm.
of, is there a person that she might be in particular. But this is Maddie's mom, I believe, from Euphoria, I think.
Oh, and I believe also the guy who he ends up saving, the lone federal worker, is this guy named Burton, who we'll see in the present is sort of like the right
Right.
hand man of Isaac, who's played by Ben Allers, who I believe is from the Gilded Age as well. So like all this,
Oh, fun.
listen, all these other HBO shows are in hiatus. They're like, just hop on over to The Last of Us, make a quick cameo, make a good day rate here.
Yeah, it's great. Good. Keep it in the family.
So let's stop over with Isaac while we're sort of on his train right now and speak about the other big scene that he has, which is someone's in the kitchen with Isaac, and we get to your point about exposition a lot from this man, whether it is the sultry, lascivious dialogue about how great copper cookware is, to the revelation that he has, kidnapped one of the Seraphites. I'm having trouble figuring out, like, if this was connected to the attack that we saw at the end of last episode, right? Like if he was part of the group that was traveling that we saw, or whether this was a completely different Seraphite that they kidnapped.
I think probably if they're supposed to be connected, it would have been a little bit more explicit. I think they're just connected in the sense that like there were Seraphites moving. They have this, hostage basically that they're trying to figure out where the Seraphites be. I don't know that you're supposed to be like, oh, he was in that scene from last week and they kidnapped him. I don't think that, like, there's a chance, but I don't think that's what we're supposed to take from that scene.
Well, besides, again, how much people want to put copper pots in every upcoming wedding registry. First off, though, I do love again, the symbolism of the fact that copper heats up quickly, but then loses heat quickly thereafter. Sounds like the temperament of some of the best and worst traits of some of our characters, like an Abby, like an Ellie, etc. But I think the big thing to take away from this scene is a highlight about not only the battle between the WLF and the Seraphites, but how much of it ties into the overall theme of how, as we spoke about last week, as we spoke about many times before, you try to seek vengeance as a way to fill a hole in your heart, but if anything, it's a temporary fix. As essentially, once you sort of get that fix and you get your, just desserts, then those people will want to get revenge on you, and the cycle continues. We get a little bit of like a duck season, rabbit season back and forth between the two of them of like, oh, you kill children. Well, it's because you trained the kids to shoot at us. Well, that's because your wolves killed the children. That's because you trained the kids to shoot at us. Like, it's almost a little farcical at certain points, but I think again it goes to really nail home this idea that not only do we have the Seraphites versus the WLF greats, it's also a little bit of like classic, almost Avatar-esque, or like the Ents invading, in the two towers. This idea of like the more natural, fanatical group versus like the hardened militaristic WLF.
Yeah, I actually think like this is you have to set up a story where Ellie and Dina are going to head to Seattle, and they sort of end up being in the middle of this sort of civil war, which is different than in season 1. We get I always forget. I believe it was in Pittsburgh in the game, and it's in Kansas City in the show, with Melanie Linsky's character, where that is much more of like just like a force that's taken over, like the Civil War is over. It's done. As opposed to setting up, like, I think that it's not super easy to set up like this sort of like middle conflict. And I think like to some degree, I mean, I think that certainly the Seraphites seem much more empathetic at the moment than the WLF does. The beginning, although at the beginning you have basically you have Isaac sort of rebelling against Fedra, which is in itself felt like government rule. So
but which is also then again a very fun theme as well, right? Of like, okay, you think that you are breaking the wheel when in actuality you're just kind of continuing the process. And it seems like while the WLF thought they were freeing everyone from the shackles of tyranny that was Fedra, they might have soon figured out that like, oh, the only way that we can establish some sort of society here on a consistent basis is if we have a little bit of an iron grip over things.
Yeah. So I think they do a really good job of setting of like making the stakes here pretty clear in terms of like the differences between these two groups. I guess the other thing I can say at this point is the Seraphites, there's the prophet is like, and so you've heard reference to her, I think, in both episodes now. Some people do think, I was wondering whether to leave this, but I think because he basically says like, some people think that she's just we don't really know that her, and some people wonder whether actually we'll learn that the woman what'd you say, Hanrahan, is that her name? Hanrahan, if she will end up being the prophet, and there actually being like a more direct connection between the WL, and that potentially could set up some stuff from Isaac, which I think is kind of fun. But
that's my big question mark right now, is that it is interesting that again Ellie and Dina are essentially walking into a war zone when they thought they were bringing the war. We see these explosions in the distance to close things out that make them realize that maybe they're in a bit over their heads. I think obviously the missing piece is what is causing this schism. To talk about timely references, is it like a land skirmish? Is it like, hey, we were here first and you're trying to infringe upon us? Is it that something very specific happened where one party has possession of something that the other one wants? Is it just a misunderstanding or just a difference in values? I'm not entirely sure at this moment. I agree that I think this scene did a nice job of, in its distillment, breaking down that there is a conflict going on. I'm just hoping in the next 3 episodes that we get a little bit of digging into what exactly that might mean without it necessarily clubbing us over the head with a copper pot.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I talked about very early on in this season, or about the show in general, is that like this is really the like Ellie and Joel story that you get from season one, where like they are the only people listed as sort of like main character. We've obviously
Hmm.
evolved to that. We've added more people into the main cast, and obviously Joel is gone now. But to some degree, like the people we've met so far, these are our main characters, and so it'll be the balance of the show to figure out how much they can sort of like layer in here that still feels like it's serving the story, that is predominantly at this point about Ellie, and the people around her. So
Well, that said, let's talk about Ellie and specifically the person around her here in Dina, as we are day one in Seattle. Love that Survivor lower third Chiron of like, all right, it's the first day. Really, I think bringing home the point of, I imagine at least, we're staying here for the rest of the season. And so the first day into the night is a big one. We get a nice, symbol of the fact that, again, everything was frozen in time in 2003 as these two girls happen to ride through, a pride-filled neighborhood only to not have any sort of sense as to what the rainbows mean. Maybe they're all optimists, and yeah, to a certain extent, they're not incredibly wrong.
yeah, fun here that they go through, what presume would be. I wonder how like accurate this is in terms of if there was like an LGBTQ area
Yeah,
in Seattle
Capitol
specifically.
Hill, I believe, is what the name of the district is.
Yeah, so kind of fun. Yeah, but as they're stood still, and exploring that. This also feels like so. I feel like the show has just done a great job of like making it feel like the video game in terms of
Mhm.
just the way it looks and the way sort of like the areas that they're walking through and the way it's like, they clearly climbed on that thing to get to that thing and through that window. So I enjoy this, and Ellie and Dean, I think they have excellent chemistry together as they're like chatting about, the first, Apollo mission, the failed
And
Apollo
I
mission.
love that pull as well. For those that might not remember, Ellie, one of her dreams was to like go to the stars and to become an astronaut, and she has a lot of like surprising knowledge of astronomy, as she talked about with Joel in the last season. So I love that. Probably in the 5 years since having settled down in Jackson, she's delved even further into that. But she's a woman of many talents, Gray. She doesn't just know Apollo 1. She's going to take us to the stars with a little bit of a rendition on the guitar here. Let us get into, I know from a video game perspective, something that a lot of people were looking forward to. Ellie and Dina, they say, okay, we're going to go infiltrate what we think is the WLF headquarters, but we have to wait until nightfall. So in the meantime, let's hang out in this music store. Ellie's going to find like the only untempered guitar in the entire post-apocalypse, and she decides to play a bit of a throwback here. Now, obviously, I think you and Taran will get into a lot more about the similarities and differences, if there are any, between this
It,
moment in the games.
it's basically exactly the same.
So then what did you think about the execution here then?
Yeah.
Did it work for you?
Yeah, it's great. I love it. The scene is like, yeah, it's pretty well admired in the game. I love it. I think the song choice is very fun. There's an additional detail that like in terms of not anything about this scene in particular, but in the in season one, when we first meet Joel, there is a warning system in place, and it is 80s music,
Yeah.
is the code for danger. And so I love this sort of like this moment, honestly, it really reminds it feels quite a bit like if anybody is a Schitt's Creek fan. I feel like the like slow
Simply the
cover
best. Yeah.
of the song, it's very cute. It's lovely. If you look at the song lyrics, I think it's like a really strong choice in terms of a song that Ellie in particular is singing about her relationship with love. I think it plays completely into the themes. It's very cute, adorable. I love it a lot, Mike.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit more because, yeah, it is odd to say, all right, let's really dissect the lyrics of the Aha 80s song, which is most famously known for like its pencil sketch world that people got pulled into. But Ellie is maybe serving as an example of trying to pull someone into her own world here. I mean, I think the biggest comparison I would make on this show is in Long, Long Time when Bill sits down at the piano and belts out this Linda Ronstadt version. I think much like that, with no offense to Nick Offerman or Bella Ramsey, both of them are not the best singers, but I think that makes things a lot more effective because it's not like, all right, and here comes, Natalie Wood singing things behind the scenes. Like, it actually is them singing from the heart, even if it's not like the most technically proficient performance. And they truly are with the themes of this ditty and some of the lyrics behind it. I think it's incredibly appropriate that the words that Ellie specifically like locks eyes with Dina during are life is okay and it's no better to be safe than sorry. And I think it speaks to a lot. She is going to muse later on, like, I did such a good job hiding my feelings for you. This is abundantly clear that that is not
Yeah.
the case, that essentially she is trying to communicate through this song. Again, unintentionally, she was not playing specifically for Dina until Dina came up and said, keep going. But it's clear that she's very much singing this song from a place of like, this is a very scary thing to do, but if you'll have me, I am someone that can make you happy for the rest of your life.
Well, it says she's not playing for Dina. She's playing in the music store where you're like not supposed to make it. You're in the like zombie affected universe, not supposed to be making any noise. You
I
play
mean,
the
to be fair,
guitar.
she did absolutely clang that hatch open
That's
on the
true.
tank. If they weren't coming then, I think just a couple of strums of the acoustic guitar won't send them flooding in.
Yeah, but this it's such a perfect song choice here in terms of like the idea, like the chorus, like I'll be gone in a day or two, like this idea that like this it could be fleeting, but we might as well do it. If you think about, is it last week when they talk about like have you ever killed anybody?
Yep.
And Riley died, Joel has died, like this is a person who's still, the idea of like still taking a chance to love somebody, even though it might, that's so much of the theme of season one is Joel having a wall and not willing to let anybody in. And he finally does. And it obviously causes him like tremendous heartbreak. Well, that's at least the risk you take when you love somebody. And so, yeah, Ellie to be like literally singing that message is great. It's phenomenal. It's really good.
But I also think it's a larger symbol about how Ellie views herself in relationships too, right?
Yes.
Because we talked about this last week. After Joel loses Tess, he very much regards Ellie as just like a burden for a while,
Yep.
right? Like this thing that he has to do that he doesn't want to do. So even the lyrics, take on me, take me on. I mean, first off,
Right.
the inversion of those words obviously mean two different things. Comes as across as a little combative, adversarial as well, right? Take me on speaks to Ellie as well, that through her passions, she can also be incredibly argumentative. But at the same time, I think it is also speaking to how she probably views herself, even though she has opened up her heart enough to let Joel into her life for those 5 years. I'm sure there is still a certain extent that makes her feel like, take me on. Like I am this thing that you have to deal with, but if you'll let me, I will try to make up for it by making you feel good in more ways than one. I think it does reflect a bit upon how ever since she was a kid, and especially I think given her incredibly special circumstances that she will bring to light in this episode, that at certain points she maybe feels like a MacGuffin or feels like a tool that can be utilized by other people.
Yeah, it's super interesting because there's a way in which actually it wouldn't be surprising for Ellie to become the Joel in situations in the sense that because she's immune, there's so much of a greater chance that people die around Ellie than her. Like there's this like one
Mhm.
major way in which she would die, but that's actually just like not how she sees
Yeah,
herself.
it's really like the price of immortality, right? Of
Right.
like we see this all the time with characters being like, I lose everyone I love around me.
Yeah.
But to your point, she doesn't necessarily see herself as like this immensely tragic figure.
No. But yeah, the scene is great. I love it. Very happy. It's like in here, and also I think it's just done really well. The scene of like the overgrowth, Dina sitting cross-legged as she's like looking up and watching Ellie. It's very cute.
Yeah, and fantastic performance from Isabella Merced as well, who is like brought to tears by it. Again, it reminds me so much of Long Time, where you have Frank like looking on admiringly,
Yeah.
where you just feel like in that moment, I wouldn't say that that's where Dina fell in love with Ellie the same that Frank did with Bill, but
Yeah.
it does feel similar in that it's like almost affirming her feelings for her of like,
Yeah.
this is somebody who surprises me in so many different ways.
Also, just when someone can play the guitar and can sing, it's like you're like the best. It's like it's cute. It's great. I love it. Yeah.
And especially the words that follow that up, right? Where
Yeah.
Dina says, you've gotten pretty good. And Ellie says, thanks. all those lessons from Joel. Dina replies, he taught you well. She replies, he did. And again, it's a beautiful moment of I can't again, I cannot say closure because I feel like the door will never be closed when it comes to Joel's presence in Ellie's life, especially as she pursues her own path here. But it does feel like for the first
Well,
time we get sort of
yeah.
like a sense of the weight of Joel's absence, right? Of like he taught me in so many ways.
Actually, this is great. This is great. You've unlocked something for, which is like, so first of all, there's just the thing of like her finding the guitar strings. That's the thing that like he comes into the room and he's like, oh,
Yep.
I'll fix the guitar, and he goes out. And so, just like it's there, but also this thing of like it would be so easy for Ellie to become like Joel, like Joel was when we first met Joel. But it's actually because Joel like opens up to Ellie that lets Ellie not be. So yeah, that's like, so that piece of like teaching is not just about teaching her how to play the guitar. It's actually about like how to love, which is like really lovely.
And what is interesting is, again, if my assumption is that there is some sort of moment that happened with Joel and Ellie on New Year's Eve that we didn't see, I would imagine that like Dina would have been brought up as a topic of conversation, considering how it spurred that argument along. And maybe in that moment, Joel was able to give some like fatherly advice as to how to woo a possible partner that Ellie has now sort of taken to heart as well and decided like, okay, it's no better to be safe than sorry. Like, and I'm somebody who, while immune to the bites of the infected around me, I want to make sure that I'm not immune to the possibility of getting my heart broken. And the only way to do that is to put myself out there. And again, as much as she will not necessarily make the move in this episode, that will be Dina. This, in a way, felt like her kind of doing that.
Yeah. Also, it's a great point, but I couldn't help but think, who is my assumption? Maya Assumption.
Is that Hanrahan's last name?
Uh-huh.
Hanrahan Maya
Maya
Assumption?
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, let's get into a lot more action from Dean and Ellie before they're getting into some very
Oh,
different action here. Let's talk about mainly the main set piece from the middle part of this episode is that they go through this plan, they sneak into, this WLF hideout. There's WLF about, just not in the ways that they would expect. This felt, again, Grace, I'm speaking out of my tuchus here, very video gamey, though, of like
yeah.
them having to hide from the WLF
Yeah.
that comes charging in as they realize that the Seraphites have struck in more ways than one. This one guy got riddled with arrows. Very garish sight of a lot of people basically like hung with their entrails bleeding out. Again, a big sense from Ellie and Dina as to like, they got more than they bargained for. Even more so when they find out that a lot of commuters in Seattle, the infected, they're taking the subways, Grace.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, this is no, this feels incredibly video gamey. I actually think it's like feels far more terrifying. Like I'm not somebody who I know Jess has talked a little bit to me about it. She's like, no, I found the game very scary. I think because you like respawn. It's like
Yeah.
for me, it's not that scary. But so that the idea of like just how quickly they could be shot at, and like I know that they're not gonna die here, but also I'm like, that would be terrifying. Trying to climb up the metal stairs. No, thank you. So I think it's very terrifying. But yeah, it's really well done. The chase scene ultimately leading to sort of like the sneak up from behind thing, which is very video gamey, and then Dina shoots him and they flee into the subway. The subway stuff is like, I mean, if you have any sort of claustrophobia, even if you are not
Oh my
claustrophobic,
God.
the like them sort of invading into the car is quite scary. I thought all this looked really good. Do you know what? One thing too, the whole thing was very dark. It did not. I could see everything, Mike.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Thank you. Sunday night on HBO. You finally figured out your lighting issue there. Yeah, I totally agree. All of the grotesque scope of this was fully showcased in front of our eyes. And I love that as well. I mean, I think season 2 of The Last of Us, again, they said before the season started that they wanted to make it a little more actiony, which makes sense, I think, given some of the more militaristic stuff that's going on in this season. But between like the siege on Abby in episode 2 and this, I feel like this is one of the biggest times in the series in general when, again, you just get a massive scope of like what a horde of infected can be. And it is terrifying, right? Obviously, we had everything with Abby and the fence in episode 2, but even here, to your point, with like them trying to make their way through the subway cars like it's rush hour and everyone's just trying to, impede them and just flagrantly throwing themselves through these broken windows is absolutely terrifying.
And I'm pretty sure none of the infected paid their fare.
Yeah, a lot of turnstile jumpers here.
So we get this moment where they're going to try to go through the turnstile, and the infected are running, and Ellie is going to put her arm out and be bitten. This is a slight change in the sense that if you've listened to any of our season 1 coverage, you might have heard like in the game there are spores, and I feel like if I remember correctly, I don't know this for sure, but it does feel like they removed the spores just like
they
as
did.
we were. Sorry,
Yeah.
just for why they did it, which is we were dealing with an airborne pandemic. I believe that's the reason. I don't know that there's much.
And I think they wanted to do the whole like convention of the mycelial network too, right? There was like this
Right.
underground sort of form of communication that we've seen throughout. We even saw it in the subway tunnels when like you see a little bit of the fungus kind of move in a way to alert the horde that there's people there and to go invade.
And so you have these scenes where in the video game, when you like walk into, when you're about to head to the spores, like the characters will often put on the mask. Ellie doesn't need to put on a mask. And so that is the moment where Dina finds
she's
out
one of
that
those
Ellie,
people.
She's and Joel is anti-vax. So both of them should be very canceled, I think, Mike. So there's a little difference there in terms of how Dina finds out. I think that, like, I know some people are like, oh, I hope they do the spores this season. I honestly think to set up spores and then to be like, oh, and now Ellie can walk, like, because what you'd have to do is Dina be like, wait, you can't go in the spore. Like, how does Dina know that Ellie can't go in the spores? Like, maybe spores are just not as bad as the rest of it. So I think it's like this sort of change to just have like the bite and for her to be like literally shielding her. I think like it works for me. I think it's totally fine and makes sense. And then we, I like where we get to in the theater. And I actually learned, Mike, they didn't have to change the theater at all. That's just the current state of theater going in America.
Exactly. It was just a Tuesday afternoon showing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There was no Minecraft movie. Where actually, if you see people in the background, they're yelling "chicken jockey."
Chicken jockey. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I also like this gesture as well as compared to what you outlined, because again, I like the physicalized, brutalistic symbol of like Ellie being a literal human shield for Dina, right? That she is putting her body on the line, at least from what Dina perceives, for someone that she cares about. And it leads beautifully into this standoff in the theater where like you want to let out an exhale, much like Ellie of like, oh, thank God we made it through, Dina's alive. And then you suck your breath back in as you turn around and she is like tearfully pointing a gun at her, being like, why did you have to do that? Because again, put yourself in Dina's shoes.
Yeah.
Joel was at this point the only other person who knew Ellie's secret. Everybody else, including Joel himself, died with that knowledge. And so Dina, from her perspective, thinks Ellie just like made the greatest sacrifice of all and essentially lined herself up for a brutal death. And now I'm going to have to put her out of her misery. And so it's heartbreaking from her perspective and slightly comedic at the same time for Ellie to go, no. Okay. Let me talk to it. This is going to sound incredibly ridiculous, but let me outline the fact that I am sort of the chosen one.
No, I like this. I think this is like perfectly tense. And again, like we know, I mean, I think it's all this time where like when you know that basically these characters have plot armor, like I mean, I guess maybe not. I mean, I guess I'm like talking in my butt because like Joel died this season, so like I feel like I'm like alluding to like, at least for now, like in the 4th episode of the season, like pretty unlikely that we're going to lose Ellie or Dina here. So I think that the scene is really good, sort of despite that we know like what the ending would be, and adds in this element here that like, yeah, why would Dina think anything else? And so for Ellie to not like, what I really like is that she tries to sort of talk her way out of it. And when that doesn't work, she's like, actually, I'm going to go sit over there. You can hold me at gunpoint all night. And in the morning, we'll see what happens. But I promise you, I'm infected. I did really, I did like this. I think I'm trying to think through, Mike, the framing of like when Dina, when Ellie wakes up and she's like, no, it's rain. Like, I'm not a monster. And the thing is filmed like that we get like, we don't see Dina's face. Do you want to
because she's holding a flashlight initially. And to your point, I thought it was interesting that we don't get a read on her face. At least, again, to your point about the lighting, not from what I saw from, my version of watching. And then what she turns off the flashlight and then picks up a lantern to showcase her face a bit more. And I think it was like purposely done to hold us in that moment of like, how is she going to react? Yes, Ellie has been proven that she is what she claims, she is immune. How is Dina going to react to that? Is it going to be a like, oh my God, you kept the secret from me the entire time? Is it going to be putting her quite literally at arm's length of like, what are you, freak? Obviously, it turns out to be the exact opposite, because then we swap out the more accusatory, harsh light of the flashlight for the warmer, more encompassing light of the lantern, as Dina has her own secret to reveal.
Yeah, so I will say this is where my quibble is just the parsing of information. I'm fine with everything about how Ellie is is immune. I'm fine with that. I do think the moment of her being like, "Hey, here's my secret," and then Dina being like, "Here's mine," and actually, again, it's maybe not even that. It's that they immediately have. I don't think this is a moment that that I would be like, all right, let's get it on. But emotions are high. Again, they're young. Maybe this is the thing I most have to like put in. But I couldn't help but feel like, oh, that to me, it's this part. It's like she's like when Dina realizes that Ellie is, and again, I guess I can like quibble with it, but Dina she didn't sleep all night. She's standing waiting. She knows she's done these pregnancy tests. She has 4 of them. Like, it's probably fine in the long run. I just felt in the moment I was like, oh, okay, all right, fine. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth on it. I think the pregnancy reveal, besides it being incredibly validating for yours truly, I didn't think we'd get this information revealed the next episode, mind you. But I do think it makes sense from like a heightened emotions perspective that, again, she has gone through, Dina, this entire sleepless roller coaster of like, oh my God, I really care about this person. Oh, I thought they were dead, that they sacrificed themselves for me. Oh, wait, now they're actually the only person I've ever met who is immune to this catastrophic, affliction. I got to just sort of come out with what I have as well, something that I have been sitting on that has only been validated for me in the past couple days. Like, it makes sense that that was brimming to the surface. I agree. It then kind of segues oddly into, the carnal pleasures, but like, I don't know, sometimes disclosure is sexy. Maybe it's this idea that because they are both so vulnerable and out in the open from an emotional perspective, that just floods into the physical perspective as well.
I think the more I sit with it, the more I'm fine with it. But that was my immediate reaction of like, oh, it feels very like, pregnancy reveal, sex, immediately sleeping together. Feels a little TV, but it's fine. It's, and then I just feel like, and then we get into we have the morning where they sort of are chatting a little bit more, and Dina's going to fully reveal like how she knows for sure she is. And I've seen some critiques about Dina's sexuality. And in a way that people are like a little bit upset that she's not more sort of like openly queer from the beginning, like openly bi from the beginning. It's a little
right,
bit
because there was the whole thing last week, right, where Dina's like, "Oh, that was a fun lark, the kiss that I had with you, because you're gay and I'm not. So what was that like for you?"
But when we get this story of her telling her mom, she's like, I like boys and I like girls, and her mom saying like, no, you just like boys, and talking about how she likes Jesse and he's a great guy, but she doesn't want to be with him. I felt like I don't know. I feel like this is a really good example of the way in which, like, yeah, this story is like to a degree about coming out. And like, certainly I don't balk at anybody who's queer and is looking for sort of like people who are unabashedly like okay to just be out and be themselves even from the moment they know they're queer. That's like a very like idealized version of what we want to be, and that is my hope for the future of all queer people, is that like there isn't like coming out isn't really a thing. You just can say who you are and people accept you for that. At the same time, I actually quite like this, like there's almost this bit of like internalized homophobia that Dina has, and it's not huge. It's not like this like massive thing. It's not the plot of the whole show is like Dina struggling with her sexuality. It's just this moment she had before that I think is almost wrapped up in being with Jesse as much, and like what a life with Jesse could be, as much as it is about like being with Ellie and who she is. I actually really like this, and I don't mind the stuff in here like last week where she's like, oh no, I'm not gay, like you are, because I think like a lot of queer people do have these like moments of internalized homophobia. They are not like these massive, huge problematic, things. It's just the realization of like, especially, I think the show lives in a very interesting thing where 2003 time stops. It's not like there weren't queer people at the time, like there is a queer community in Seattle that they stumble upon, but also time sort of froze. And for some people, that means there's like, I think for Ellie, like that's Ellie's story. Actually, I think it's like the
Yeah.
kind of like unabashedly being openly queer the whole time, as
Yeah, and I
opposed
think
to Dina's
and
story.
all yeah, and then also for her, navigating a world alone in more ways than one, right? That like the person she was romantically entangled with died, and so it probably makes her even feel even more alone as well when time sort of froze at an opportunity where being out was not necessarily as conventional as it is even today. And so we talked about this before in season one, right? Like how that stigma also had her feel even more isolated, and why divulging into someone like Dina, and that's why carried forward with the Dina story as well. It's understandable why she feels the way that she did. And it also then speaks to the theme as well of generations and what do parents instill onto their children and what do they leave behind. And it's clear that Dina's mother is no longer with us, but what she left behind stuck with Dina, that even when her mom wasn't around, she still felt at least partially shamed for the feelings that she was having with Ellie, to the point where, as was mentioned last week, like her saying, "Oh, you're gay, I'm not, so how am I as a kisser?" was not her necessarily like saying, "Oh, the straight part, the part who likes men is overwhelming the part that likes women." It was more so like a sense of denial, of like, "No, no, no. I have been told that I don't like girls. That was just a one-time thing. I was drunk. I definitely don't like girls." And I think that what really hit for me is one of these lines that Ellie said when she is, begging to not get shot by Dina, when she says, "I'm going to wake up exactly as I am right now, me." And I think it's that sense of identity that Dina was coming to terms with, that I think in that moment of life or death, not from her perspective, but Ellie's, that possibly inspired her to finally come to terms with the fact of like, oh yeah, I am what, my parents have foisted upon me, but I also am so much more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I like it. I can understand people's desire for a more sort of I don't know, like a cleaner version of just like this person has no issues, qualms about her sexuality, but I think that this is a I like it. I think it's interesting. It feels very human, and as a queer person myself, it feels very relatable. So I like this.
I also like the way that Dina told her story about how when she was sort of, for lack of a better term, like kind of put in the closet, when her mom affirms to her that like, no, you're not bi, she
Yeah.
says that she got stuck. And I think
Yeah.
again, this feeling of like feeling trapped, feeling sort of cordoned off, cooped up, is something that very much resonates with the Ellie story. We saw this a lot with like the first stages of her in Jackson, right? That like when she was most free, it was when she was on patrol. And in many ways, I think she sort of felt all eyes on her in Fedra, in Jackson, etc. And so I think it's a vibe that she very much understands as well. This idea of feeling like, you are just looking to spread your arms and you have been so contained into this box of having to be something that it's erased a lot of your identity. I mean, even going to what Gail, you know, oh so explicitly outlines last week about nature versus nurture. Like this is very clearly outlined in Dina's story, where it's okay, the nurture is that her parents, and her mom in particular, was really foisting this idea of what her, sexuality was upon her. But what wins out, much like the overgrowth that we see throughout Seattle here, nature inevitably wins out here. And that Dina is able to express herself in full. Now she's got a baby. I don't know how I felt, to be honest, Grace, about the whole "we're having a baby" line from
Yeah.
Ellie. Like I thought it was cute, but to me it almost symbolized also this idea of like, oh yeah, we got like a little bit of them as a duo, that it feels like we're jumping into things very quickly. But again, that might be speaking to the age of it all.
Every time I go back to like, I feel like the responses are immature. I'm like, and she's 19. She's not, she's
Yeah.
not 14, but at the same time, I can sometimes feel like she sometimes feels really young, which she probably is, as somebody who lives in sort of like this type of world. So I definitely felt that too. I'm like uncomfortable. I think there's a world where like Dina and Ellie, I think what you're supposed to read is that they're very good for each, like they're like
Yeah,
they are
they
a
got
good
great
match.
bands.
And so to that point, like I always think about this where it's like I mostly think about it actually from like queer stereotypes where it's like
Mm,
most of the time, like when you're watching it, like it feels like we've seen many versions of sort of like the of queer stereotypes, especially like a gay man stereotype. But like there are there are queer people who are that, who like do fit that. They
mm.
may not fit like every single, but like it's it. And so I kind of in this example, it's like I don't know, Dina, like, is Dina the one person in the world who like Ellie can make that joke, but like we're having a baby and Dina's okay with it, you know, like that is like their specific relationship. It's yeah, I it's not what I'm most hung up about, I think, this episode, but I felt it too. I'm like, oh, that's okay, all right, yeah,
I mean, my not so bold prediction is that the thruple fantasy that Ellie is talking about, the and baby makes three, ain't happening. I think if I'm thinking about which one of the three characters is most likely to get wiped off the board, I would say maybe Jesse is number one. Dina, now I go back and forth about because we could do the trope, Grace, of like Dina, much like Ellie's mother herself, like gets infected or something, gets shot, dies giving birth, and now
yeah.
Ellie is left to take care of the baby on her own. But I still think Jesse, for whatever reason, would be out of the picture to let these two kids carry on their fantasy, which carries through to the last moment of this episode as the two of them are like, all right, we've got our eyes on the place we're going to go next. You know, they grab a walkie and they overhear some frequencies from the WLF, only to see that they're a little busy. They've got some stuff on their hands, but regardless of not only the frightening picture in front of them, but everything they've experienced in the last 24 hours, the difference now is that they have each other. And again, a really nice two-liner here where Ellie is going to initially tell Dina to stay back, says it's different now. Dina says, yes, it is. And so while I agree that a lot of their banter and dynamic has not necessarily changed, which is some of the signs of the greatest couples out there, I'd be very intrigued to see this information on both sides being brought to light, how that is going to affect not only how they proceed forward, but like if the other person is in danger, what will they do to protect them? You know, given how important each of them have the stakes weighing in their lives.
Yeah, I like this last scene. There's a lot. I feel like it's early in season one. I feel like there's a very similar scene of, is it Joel and Ellie? They're like looking out over. I can't remember. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but maybe I'm just like video game brain and like being like, I feel like you get that a lot of like you look out onto the.
Yeah, I mean, no, we got scenes in the beginning and end of season one there, whereas the two of them looking out over Boston, and then we get
Right.
sort of like its bookend of the two of them looking out over Salt Lake City once they got there.
Right. So I like that a lot. And then you have the two of them holding hands and are gonna go forth. And it's good. Taran and I will chat a little bit about so like one thing I was surprised by, I thought that we would go back at some point to Jackson and maybe touch point with Tommy or Jesse or Gail or something
Mm-hmm.
there. We really don't. We are fully in Seattle this whole episode, which I'm fine with, by the way. And actually, I was talking to this with Taran about like, I wonder how much more like Gail we will get this season. And then I did totally forget that Jeffrey Wright was in the show, and I do feel like you can kind of like, I feel like they're a big enough star you can sort of be like, if Gail like isn't really in the show very much, like the back half, we mostly have Jeffrey Wright, so we'll see.
Yeah, my prediction is that we will see Gail at least one more time, but she'll be most prominently shown in flashback form. I still think we're going to get like some sort of scene. Like Joe Pantoliano cannot show up in just a file photo, you know? Like I think we're going to get some sort of flashback of him just in general, or maybe we find out about like the day that Joel had to kill him. That will be Gail's probably biggest appearance in the rest of the season so far. But yeah, I imagine we're going to get a bit of a check-in in Jackson, and maybe that's how we're going to balance out the rest of the season. But Grace, while we're staying in Seattle, anything else you wanted to highlight from this week's episode of The Last of Us before you take a much deeper, more spoilerific dive into everything with Taran in the next couple days?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's a good episode. I think it has a balance of action set pieces and then like really good character stuff. And I do think the more I think about some of the scenes and the things that my immediate reaction was like, I don't know, like whether I like the reveal of the pregnancy and then they sleep together and then whatever, but I do like a lot of the stuff that's in there. I just think the characters are so strong in this story. And I think that it's fair for me to be like, more than 10 years older than people, being like, maybe they're just immature. Maybe they're just young, having a baby at, I don't know how old specifically. I can never remember how old Dina specifically is, but yeah, I thought this was a really good episode and I like breaking it down with you, Mike. So yeah.
Same. The last thing that I will mention is that we find out that the WLF has nicknamed the Seraphites. That's something that Isaac has brought over. Like, we've got to have nicknames. That's what the best authoritarian regimes have, or, disparaging nicknames for everyone. The Seraphites are known as Scars. I think it makes sense, obviously, from an aesthetic perspective, given what we saw of them last week. But I think also, again, the symbology of a scar, right, which is sort of like a blemish that is permanent but symbolizes like an injury, or nobody really has good scars, Grace. I think that the nickname actually does mean a lot as well, in terms of also how they regard the Seraphites as well, which is just, again, sort of like an unwanted skin blemish over anything useful.
Yeah, but from the other side of things, if you get a scar, it means that your body healed. You're still alive.
Yeah.
It healed the thing, something happened in your body to do that. If somebody wants a free meme, you can have this one. You can is a quote. Take a picture of the part where the guy says, "Scar got what he deserves," and put me at the end of the Lion King. That's it. If you want that one, you can have that.
But not at the end of Mufasa.
Not at the end of Mufasa. Nope. Nope. No. No, that sort of stuff, that the details there of like the nicknames for them feels also like very like it's great world building of
All right, well, we will continue into this world, into the Shadowlands, if you will, of the WLF headquarters. Assumingly next week, we'll check in on Jackson, perhaps. But in the meantime, you can check in on what Grace and Taran have going on over on the Deep Dive, coming a couple of days later. Again, comparisons to the video game. You do not need to be an out-and-out avowed scholar of the video games. Check it out. There is like a section that talks specifically about the events of this episode before diving into what is to come. So all are welcome, as well as over here on We Know Scripted TV. In general, I talked about the much anticipated season 3 finale of Down the Hatch, Battlestar Galactica with Josh. Grace, you and me and Taran are now officially halfway through the final season of Andor. You and Taran are talking you talked Sinners on Tastemakers this past week?
We talked it a couple weeks because it had the lowest. There's some caveats to this, but it had one of the lowest drops in week-to-week box office in history, which is a good thing. Meaning, just as many people basically went to go see it in week 2 versus week 1, which is great news for the. That's good. Maybe the theater won't become decrepit like it was in The Last of Us.
There we go. Exactly. So we will be seated, unlike the majority of people in that theater, to talk about episode 5 of The Last of Us season 2 next week, as this, song thrums along. 5th string. Will it be as beautiful as the 4 that came before it? Only time will tell. Thank you all so much for listening. Grace, great work as per usual. Until next time, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.